Hey guys, this is Derek Sturman with Derek Sturman Photography. I've had quite a few people ask me to do a review on image stacking. It's taken me a little while to actually get around to it, but here it is, so we're just going to jump right in. This tutorial is going to be entirely on how to reduce image noise using only Adobe Photoshop. There are other programs out there like Starry Landscape Stacker. I've heard good reviews about those apps. I just don't use them personally. I only use Photoshop. So the first thing you need to know about image stacking is that a camera sensor generates noise. I'm going to show you an example of noise just so that we're perfectly clear. Here's one that was taken of my living room just today to use as an example. It's one of these. So if you've used a high ISO before in photography, you should already know you can see all this terrible color noise, the magenta, the green, and the purple, and then just this general static noise that kind of destroys the detail of the image. So this image was shot at 12,800 ISO. Obviously, the higher your ISO is and on your camera, the more noise you're going to have. The same is true with how hot your image sensor is, so the more you're exposing, the longer your shutter is open and the camera has to function and send electricity through that image sensor. That creates noise. So you want to be careful keeping your camera cool, and actually taking shorter exposures at a lower ISO will help you reduce noise. So you can see this image is really noisy, and if you go in and you use some of these Adobe tools like Luminance, it really doesn't help because it blurs the photo. It's trying to kind of blur the overall texture of the photo to make it look like that noise isn't there, and you lose a lot of detail. I still use this tool and it's still helpful. However, there's a much more effective way, and it's called stacking. So we're going to cancel this. There's a few things you need to know in order to stack images. The first thing you should always do when you're stacking, I don't care what kind of stacking you're doing, use a tripod. Please, it's just easier. I've had people ask me how you can do it without a tripod. It is possible, it's just not as easy. It's really important that the camera does not move, or that the exposures are as close in proximity, I guess, where the camera is being pointed as possible. Only areas that overlap are going to work for stacking. The concept of stacking is that your camera generates this noise because it's trying to collect as much light as possible. The noise is going to be random in every image. It's never going to be in the same spot because it's just that static electricity that you get when you're trying to capture those images. So because the noise is random, if you're to scroll through files, you'll see that the noise will never be in the same places. So the next thing you need to do, once you set the camera up on the tripod, you're going to take multiple exposures. So instead of just taking one 30-second exposure, if you're doing a really long exposure, say for astrophotography, you should take 3 or 4 or 5 or 8. It really doesn't matter how many, as long as the more images you take, the more detail you're likely to capture. The concept there is if the noise is going to be in random places in the image, then each image, the noise will never be in the same place, but the detail will, if that makes sense. The detail will remain the same. So then we're simply going to reduce anything that changes throughout our selection of images. We're basically telling Photoshop to remove anything that changed or find the median of multiple exposures. And that's going to result in us only having the detail left over. So in order to do this in Photoshop, the first thing you want to do, open Photoshop, go to File, scroll down to Scripts, and then load files into Stack. This is just going to open multiple files together as layers in Photoshop instead of separate images. So you want to go ahead and click Browse. Now I'm going to use the images I just took tonight of my living room, which are down here. Start with this bottom one, hold Shift, select all, and open. So you can choose to click this attempts to automatically align source images. I highly do not recommend this unless you know for a fact that nothing in your images have moved. So for example, if you are shooting a landscape and I don't know, maybe the wind was blowing the trees really hard, or somebody walked in front of your shot, or the camera was bumped, this tool is handy. However, a lot of times you'll have to do this alignment manually, and sometimes it will automatically align on something that you don't want it to. So I usually don't click this. I just leave both of these unclicked and I click OK. I'll explain more in depth why you would rather manually align source images later, especially if you're doing astrophotography. If you're shooting any landscape with the stars visible, where you have both the ground and the sky in the shot, if you choose to automatically align the source images, it'll try and align them based on the stars or the foreground. Because the stars are moving from shot to shot, you won't have good alignment. We'll give this a second to load. Okay, so now that that has loaded, you can see I have all of the images here as layers in Photoshop. And if I just zoom in here and I go from image to image, you'll see the noise will change. You can see there that the noise is never in the same place. It's just kind of scattered throughout the image, and it's just a result of the image sensor trying to be really sensitive to the light that it's seeing. And it actually looks like the camera was bumped in that shot, which is going to be a bit of a problem for us. So just for this one image, I am going to show you how to align the images because nothing else in this shot moved other than the camera. For example, there's no clouds outside moving, or I don't know, like if for some reason something were to cover up a window or a car were to move, that would be a problem in a stack. So I'm going to hold shift and select all of these images and go to edit and then auto align layers. Go ahead and just click OK. Okay, so now that that is done, you should be able to go through and kind of scroll through these images, click each one, make sure that nothing has moved. You can see it's just the noise that's changing in these images. That's what you want. You don't want any movement. This is going to basically take all of these files and eradicate anything that changes. So you can see me here in the shot, and you can see my friend over here on his computer. Because we were moving from shot to shot, you can see there's some movement back and forth in these. We're going to kind of blur or be medianed out in the shot. So you want to make sure anything that moves in the shot, you align separately. So now we're just going to, we have all of these selected, and we're going to control click, and then we're going to convert these to a smart object. Just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to duplicate this smart object too, so that we have one that has the stacking noise reduction applied and one that doesn't, so that you can see the difference in the before and after. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this. So we'll call this one before and this one after. Okay, so now that we have these converted to a smart object, you're going to go up to edit, it's under layer. Go to layer and then smart objects, and then you're going to scroll down here to stack mode. These can be really helpful if you know how to use stacking or smart objects. So we're going to scroll down to median. This is the one you're going to use to reduce the noise. So when I click median, it's going to take all of these files and basically just find the median, anything that remained the same, and reduce anything that changed in these photos. So in this case, the noise changing from image to image will be reduced, and it's going to try and just give us the median of all these images we've taken. Okay. So let's zoom in here so you guys can see the difference here in the original file. So we have our before and our after. Before, after. You can really see a big difference here in the couch. This file looks a little soft to me, but it does look a lot cleaner than what we had before with all this noise. So you can still see there is quite a bit of noise here. In the textures of the floor and the couch. It's still there, but there's a very significant difference in how heavy and overpowering that noise is in this image. So now that you've seen how it works and how effective it is, I'm going to show you how you can use it in astrophotography. So let's go to File, Open. Actually, let's File, Scripts, load files into stack, and we're going to browse. Not very organized at the moment. I'm in the process of backing up all of my files, so I apologize for that. Go in here to my raws, and 2017. Actually, it's this one. Yeah, right here, perfect. So I have here several different exposures taken just of the core of the Milky Way on a star tracker. Actually, in this case, they may not be tracked. I can't remember, to be honest. Either way, let's make sure we get all these files. Okay, so I'm going to select all these and click open. Now, for deep space astrophotography, one thing you'll want to consider is that your camera will become very hot after you've done several exposures, and it's a good thing if you can find some sort of way to cool your camera down or maybe take a break in exposures. That is if you're using a star tracker, obviously, to shoot deeper space astrophotography. So you can see we have all these files here. I'm not sure how many there are. Again, I could click this attempts to automatically align source layers. I'm going to show you why I'm not going to do that in this one. I click OK. It's going to open all my files as layers. Okay, so now that we have all these open, you can see I've got this little logo thing here for the video. I'm not sure if I can move that. I'll just zoom out. You can see this peak that is in the bottom of my frame. A lot of times, even if you're shooting just the sky, there's going to be some object like this plane or some stars. I don't know. There's something that just doesn't seem to line up with the rest of the shot. I don't know how to describe. Like if you have some foreground object, if you automatically align the source image, it just sometimes isn't correct. Especially with this plane being there, it would probably do a pretty good job because most of the shot is just the core. But you can see that this plane is moving from shot to shot. That actually probably won't be much of a problem, but this peak will be. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select this peak because it looks like I'm not using the star tracker in this shot. The peak should remain in the same spot every shot. Yep, it's just the core moving. So this was done without a star tracker. This is just fixed to a tripod. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to delete that peak from every frame in here. I'm just selecting each layer and clicking delete to make sure that nothing else affects my alignment for this shot. So you can see now there's no more peak. We just have the detail in the sky. You could clone out this plane. I don't think it's really going to affect the shot. I think it's just going to disappear once we stack. So now we're going to do the same thing. Select all these files and then control click, convert to smart object. Okay, so now that we have our smart object, again, I'm going to duplicate this just so that you can see the before and after. We're going to call this one before and this one after. So we're going to take the after and we're going to go again to layer, smart object, and then go down to snack mode and median. Oh, I'm sorry, I totally skipped a step, but that's okay. We're actually going to see what happens when you don't automatically align. I'll show you. It just reduces the image, blurs out anything that changes. So because the Milky Way is going to be in a different spot every time, we're just going to have a blurry image. So for the sake of example, we'll just let it run this process. Okay, yeah, so you can see there, that's the effect that stacking had when something moves. So because the Milky Way was moving from shot to shot, this is the result we get. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and change that. Let's go back. Before we convert to Smart Object, what we got to do is you're going to select all your layers, and make sure this peak is gone. And now that that peak is totally gone, we're going to select all these layers and go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. And then go ahead and click OK. Okay, so now that you have your layers automatically aligned, you're going to control. Well, first of all, you should probably go through, just cycle through and see if any of these frames actually moved. It looks like as long as the core and the main details remain in the same spot, then we should be fine. So I'll go ahead and control click and then convert to smart object. Okay, now we're going to do that before and after again. So now that we have our smart object, go to layer and smart object, stack mode, and median. Okay, so now if we zoom in, you should be able to see a difference in the before and the after. And the noise, especially right here, you can see a lot of that noise has been reduced. There is a little bit of this soft effect that it creates because it does reduce some of that detail, but for the most part, there's a huge difference in texture and the smoothness and how clean this image is, just from that one pass of, I can't remember how many images that was, just reducing that noise in those few frames that we stacked. So now that I have this layer, you can go ahead and you can open this in Adobe Camera Raw, and you can see a pretty big difference when you compare the before and after in Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, so now we're going to apply this technique that we've already learned on image stacking, but let's say we have a more complicated shot where the foreground and the sky both need to be stacked and they were captured in one shot. So we're going to go to Open. Actually, I'm sorry. We're going to go to File, and then Scripts, and then Load Files into Stack. And in the same folder, I should have some images taken just before these with the foreground and the sky in the shot. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and open. I'm just going to use 2 files for this example. You should probably use 3, 4, 5. Sometimes I'll use 8 files. Obviously, the more files you capture, the more detail you're capturing, the more information you're recording. So in this case, it really is the more the merrier. You want to make sure you get as much information as possible. Okay, so you can see in this shot I have both the foreground and the sky, which is going to be a problem because the foreground is not moving, but the sky is from frame to frame. So for this particular example, what we need to do is separate the foreground from the sky to make sure that when we stack each one, we're stacking them separately, and then we put them back together at the end. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the foreground. I just use this quick selection tool. This may take a while on my machine. Yeah, we just want to select the whole foreground just like that. And I can see there's a little bit of this area that's probably not going to move. I'm going to select. Okay. So now I'm going to copy just the foreground, and I'm going to press delete and then paste the foreground back in. That's just how I do it. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Just select the foreground. Not sure why this one's acting different. Let's just select this foreground because the foregrounds will be the same. Okay. Copy, paste. So now I'm just going to separate these two so I have my foregrounds And whoops, I didn't delete it here. Copy, delete, paste. Okay, so now I have my foregrounds and my sky. I usually put my foreground underneath the sky. Okay, perfect. So now that I have these, I'm going to do basically the exact same thing, except for the sky, I have to do the auto align. So Shift, Edit, Auto Align Layers. Now that those are lined up, you can see there's actually a pretty drastic difference. You can see the edge of the frame here, so there's going to be a pretty big crop factor for that. But I'm just going to take those two images and convert them to a smart object. And then I'm just going to do the same thing here. So I'm just going to take these. These are already pretty much lined up. You should be able to see, oh, maybe not, they're not. So I'll go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. I didn't realize those two frames had shifted so much. Okay, so now that those are lined up, let's put them above. Oh, I see. I've selected some of the sky in this one. Somehow those two shots were not the same. This is what I'm talking about with using a tripod and making sure your camera doesn't move. Just saves you a lot of time if everything is right the first time. You don't have to worry about that. But I mean, you basically get the idea. I've got my foreground, and I line that up, and then I move the sky back into place, right about there. And then I do the same thing where I convert this one to a smart object. That one should already be. I go to Layer, Smart Object, Stack Mode, and Median, and then I would just do the same thing to the foreground. I would just convert the two foregrounds to a smart object, and then convert their stack mode to median. And that's how, if you just set up a shot and you don't want to worry about exposing the sky and the foreground separately, which almost all the time if you're going to have a foreground, it's just easier to do it this way. Just expose multiple times, separate all the skies from the foregrounds, stack the foregrounds separately and stack the skies separately, and then put them back together. So that is how you stack to reduce noise using only Photoshop. Okay, yeah, so thanks guys for checking out this video on how to stack images to reduce noise in Photoshop. Go ahead and subscribe, that helps me out a lot, or check me out on Instagram or on Facebook, or you can check me out also on my website. So thanks again for watching this video, and yeah, check me out on there.